Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're essentially putting on our historical detective hats. We're going to investigate a fascinating author's thesis about a massive 2,000-year-old misunderstanding of Paul the Apostle. We're diving into an in-depth analysis of a super famous text, 1 Corinthians 7, and asking a big question. Was a critical piece of historical context totally lost to time? Let's get right into it. So let's just address the elephant in the room right away. Did Paul make a completely failed cosmic prediction, or have we simply lost the historical context of his words? For centuries, people have read his letters and walked away thinking, well, he was just a bit ahead of himself on the timing of the universe ending. But what if he wasn't predicting a far-off cosmic event at all? What if he was actually describing something happening right in front of him? The source text points right to these famous lines. Paul tells the Corinthians that the time is short and the fashion of this world passeth away. And this passage has puzzled readers for a long time because, well, the physical world obviously kept going, right? People kept getting married, buying groceries, and living their lives for 2,000 years and counting. So how do we possibly reconcile this urgent end-of-the-world warning with the fact that the Earth is still spinning? Section 1. The 2,000-year mistake, a crisis of consensus. We start by looking at how this puzzle has been historically handled, and the author points out a truly fascinating pattern here. From 4th century monks like John Chrysostom, who read this as a lifelong call to avoid marriage, to modern sects constantly setting new dates for the apocalypse, all the way to contemporary scholars like Bart Ehrman, who say Paul just got it flat out wrong. They all share the exact same unexamined assumption. Literally everyone assumed that the world Paul said was passing away meant the physical planet. But what if it didn't? Which brings us to Section 2, translating the prophetic idiom, the missing language equation. To really understand Paul, we have to read him in his own language. The analysis points out that Paul didn't actually use Greek words for dirt, rocks, or the physical globe. He used schema, which means an outward configuration or arrangement of a thing. And he used cosmos, which in 1st century Jewish Greek often just meant an existing system or order. So Paul deliberately chose words describing the end of a specific social and religious arrangement, not the destruction of the material universe itself. And this is exactly how ancient prophets spoke. It's a standard idiom. For instance, Isaiah described the fall of Babylon by saying the stars would fail to give light. Ezekiel talked about the sun and moon going dark when Egypt fell. Now, in both of those cases, the sun absolutely rose the next morning. They used cosmic language, like stars falling from the sky, as a powerful metaphor for national and political collapse. The author argues this is the exact same idiom Paul was using. He was describing the end of a national order in cosmic terms. Moving on to Section 3, the Jerusalem-Corinth connection, the geography equation. Now you might be wondering, okay, even if Paul meant a political collapse in Judea, why would a Roman harbor city like Corinth care? They were sitting roughly 1,000 miles away by sea. And 1,000 miles in the ancient world, that was a massive distance. Why in the world was Paul writing to them as if this storm was brewing right outside their own front door? Well, the source material breaks this down perfectly. Jerusalem wasn't just some abstract, distant city to these people. It was the absolute center of gravity for their entire civilization. They were physically and culturally tethered to it. The diaspora sent an annual half-shekel tax straight to the temple. People traveled constantly for feasts, bringing back news and, of course, anxiety. The synagogue courts in Corinth derived their authority directly from Jerusalem, meaning any tremor in Jerusalem, it hit Corinth like a tidal wave. They were completely attached to the system that was crumbling. Section 4, Signs in the Sky, uncovering the historical timeline. To prove this wasn't some vague prediction about the distant future, the author aligns Paul's warnings with a highly specific, datable crisis. Paul used verbs indicating that a present distress was already underway. And historically, it was. By the 60s CE, the Second Jewish Commonwealth was in total convulsion. We see portents in 62 CE, the revolt officially sparking in 66, and it all culminates in the tragic, fiery end of the temple in 70 CE. Paul wasn't predicting a storm a millennium away. He was warning them about the hurricane they were currently standing inside of. And the historical record fully backs up this feeling of a dying system. The author notes that the Jewish historian Josephus actually recorded a chilling event in the spring of 62 CE. The priests themselves, while serving in the inner sanctuary of the temple, heard a supernatural voice of a multitude saying, "Let us remove hence." It's incredible. This confirms from the inside that the old system was, quite literally, vacating the premises. The organism itself was registering its own end. Section 5. A single apostolic voice, the unanimous witness. The analysis makes a strong case that Paul wasn't just some rogue, panicked preacher. As this diagram from the text points out, Paul was part of a remarkably unified chorus of voices. 8 independent witnesses, including Jesus, John the Baptist, James, Peter, and the writer of Hebrews, all used the exact same language to warn their own generation about this specific impending collapse. They all said the axe was at the root, the judge was at the door, the time was short. They were one body, feeling the exact same event from different vantage points. And what the source really drives home here is that these leaders weren't just making casual predictions from a place of safety. They were already suffering the violent friction of this dying system as it desperately tried to maintain its grip. They were dealing with beatings, imprisonment, exile. This was a lived existential crucible for them. They were feeling the intense heat of the system collapsing right on top of them. Finally, section 6, the real world that ended, the shedding of the cocoon. Let's pull all these clues together to understand what Paul actually meant. The author uses this brilliant metaphor of a chrysalis. The Second Temple system was a bounded husk, reliant on one physical building, one priesthood, one ethnic line. It was designed to be terminable. It had to die and be properly discarded. And out of that decay, the unbounded seed of the new spiritual kingdom could rise, a kingdom with absolutely no structural vulnerabilities, built to expand indefinitely. The husk just had to fall away so the new life could emerge. But, and this is super important to remember, the text poignantly points out that this wasn't some easy theoretical transition. It left a massive, traumatic vacuum in its wake. Imagine the absolute disorientation and grief for the diaspora, a 1,400-year-old scaffolding that organized their calendar, their prayers, their entire society. It just vanished in ashes overnight. It was a staggering subtraction, and the early believers had to live through the terrifying, hollow silence before the new kingdom fully took its shape. Which leaves us with a pretty profound final thought to ponder today. If we stop projecting a failed, planet-destroying apocalypse onto Paul's words, his real message suddenly comes into crystal clear focus. Are we finally ready to appreciate the earth-shattering historical reality he was actually describing? It's a 2,000-year-old mystery, solved not by changing the text, but by finally recovering the language and the lived reality of the people who originally wrote it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what you read.